Now, when I meet with clients in the morning before I actually scout the property and then design the property at the end of the visit that night, there's one very, very important concept. Now, they're all important concepts. In my first book from 2012, I detailed those concepts. And this is a concept that a lot of times makes this most sense to small parcel, whitetail parcels for the clients. And it's something they can really think about and hits home to them. And it's called an inside out or outside in. Is your property an inside out property or an outside in? And I'll make this example. Typical 40-acre parcel. And you know what? We'll even make this a little bit larger because I want you guys to understand this is important. And I'm not a great artist, but I'm going to do my best. 40-acre parcel. And what I find a lot of times, and this could be a 20-acre parcel, a 100-acre parcel, doesn't really matter, even up to a 500-acre parcel. But when we're really talking truly tiny parcels, 20, 40 acres, I see this same concept where most parcels I visit are an outside-in parcel. What I mean by that is the deer are moving in the afternoon from the outside and into the parcel. For that, a lot of landowners have stand locations around the outside waiting for those deer to come back on their property and hunt those property because they're not there during the daylight. This is a bad parcel. This is what I see 95% of the time, 90% of the time, because deer feed in 5 times in a 24-hour period. Their most important feeding is the afternoon feeding. If you're waiting for those deer to come back on your property an hour before dark or at dark, that means they've spent the majority or entire rest of the day on someone else's parcel. That could be public land, it could be a large landowner that applies no pressure or non-hunting property. What I like to see parcels become are inside-out parcels, meaning that maybe you have a food source here, and this could be 160 acres. Could be that you have food here. Could be that you have a big food source down here. Regardless of the location, you're looking at a large portion of your acres where you're trying to house deer during the daylight. You could spread that area of security even to include your food plots. And you're looking at a 40-acre parcel right here that 32 out of your 40 acres would be all deer all the time, including the food plots. You're waiting for those deer and you're creating doe bedding areas next to that food. You're waiting for those does to move on to the food in that third feeding of the day, which is about an hour before darkness. They're hitting that food. They're hitting that food. They're close to that food. They're close to that bedding. And then that large core area in between that is left that does are not filtering into is that core buck bedding opportunity. Those bucks are leaving your property along with the does at dark, and they're feeding on the property around you at dark and after dark. Now remember, they'll feed twice during the night. So that's 2 times during the day. During browse, you have to have woody regeneration, acorns, shrub tips, briars, whatever it might be, woody browse. It's all woody browse, even chestnuts, whatever it might be. They're feeding on that browse during the day. You have sufficient browse for them to feed on that woody browse. They're hitting your green food plots, and then they're exiting your property after dark for the 2 nighttime feedings. What you then become, you are actually the one that has the bottom of the funnel of daylight movement, meaning that you're holding deer in and around your property. You're feeding on your property. They're browsing and bedding on your property. They're hitting your food sources on the way out of the property every single afternoon, and that is an inside-out property. That's what you want to become. That type of property is 5 to 10% or less of all whitetail parcels. Most properties are waiting for deer to come back onto their property in the evening, and when that happens, then typically no one has that inside-out property. So all these neighbors are competing for deer. The bucks are always moving back and forth across borders. And what that does is it lowers buck age structure. It exposes bucks to predation. It exposes bucks to cars, automobile, and it exposes bucks to a lot more hunters because they're moving on and off parcels during the daylight. On a property that's well designed, because it's an inside-out property, because you hold the attention of those deer around your property or on your property borders, then for that, you don't get a lot of deer crossing back and forth across your borders during the daylight. Again, If they're not crossing back and forth across the borders during the daylight, they're not exposed to predation, poachers, vehicles, and a lot of other risks that makes them exposed to danger the further they move during the daylight. Instead, you want those compact movements on your property. And for that, I believe you can take a property that has, let's just pick a random number of 2,000 daylight movements of deer on and off the property all season long. You shrink that to 100, shrink that to 200. You can drastically shrink that number because you're not spooking out that core area, you're not spooking the deer off the property, and you have an inside-out property where you're holding the attention and focus of deer on a daily basis on that particular property. Now that property, it could be that it's long 120 acre parcel. You have 40. Could be that you have a lot of food down here, maybe food down here. Now by the time you get to the back here, this is a half mile right here. If these are 40 acre, 440 yards, you get back to that back parcel right here, this area is not supported by food. You have a lot of depth right here, but the deer that might be bedded back here, and even if you have great quality cover, do they move 600-700 yards to get to this food every day? I found they don't. That there's too much space. This buck that might be bedded back here, even does and fawns, they have options. They can go this way, that way. They can come in from that way, go back and forth across borders. You add food in a location like this, a location like this, one or the other. Now you've sufficiently supported those deer that are living in this area that might travel to this food every afternoon, that live in this area, that travel to this food, that travel to this food. And then you're using the area and the space that you have, you're making sure that every acre is food supported, but that every acre doesn't have food in it. You want to create that depth. In typical areas, that depth is 300 to 500 yards. And again, you're taking deer that are on your parcel, you're sending them to food, and then you're sending them off in whatever direction they want to go in the afternoon, off your land safely after dark. And in that way, you're using still an inside-out parcel. It doesn't matter the shape of your land. We could keep drawing diagrams like this and moving that. But bottom line, when you have that inside-out parcel, you're taking deer to the outside of your borders. Now, it might be that you have a big refuge right here, non-hunting neighbor, area that doesn't allow hunting. Maybe they only hunt for gun season, so there's a lot of time. And it might be that you have bucks bedding back on that land. They go through your land to hit food, and then they're off your land after dark. They come in from this way, go to the food here, they're off your land after dark. You don't want food in the center of that situation, because then you have very little depth around to actually house deer. You send them to the center, you can't hunt them anyways, and then they come off your property after dark, but in theory they don't have enough room to actually hold. You wouldn't have enough room to hold mature bucks and does in a parcel like that. You want the food off to your sides. I'll leave you with one last point. When you have that 40-acre parcel where deer are moving from the inside of your property and then out, if you're surrounded by ag, and let's say that ag is on all sides, people say, oh, it's great, I have ag around, let the ag feed the deer. Wrong, that's really bad. Because you want deer on your own land, on a food plot, an apple orchard, something high quality, something soft mass, something green. Again, they're feeding on your land on woody browse, acorns, chestnuts, woody shrub tips, briars all day, hardwood regeneration. The first thing they want to do is hit green, and then they'll go out to that ag field after that. Remember, that ag field is lowering in moisture content every single day of the season. Corn's becoming lower in moisture content, beans are becoming picked and dried and mature, alfalfa has its last cutting of hay, gets frosted out. So all the values, nutritional values and attraction are lowering each day of the season. You can maintain that attractiveness and level of moisture and level of great attraction on your land with an inside-out movement hitting your food plots every single day. And then irregardless of the ag land that's around you, it doesn't matter if this is corn, this is beans, or it switches every year, the deer that are used to bedding here, they hit your food. If it's picked beans they want to go to, they just go this way after they leave your land. If it's standing corn that's over here they want to hit, they go that way. If it's late in the season, they're digging for alfalfa and that's up here, they'll continue that movement. But bottom line is they're using the same bedding areas, the same food sources all season long. And if you simply rely on ag around you, then those rotations are always changing. You might have bedding areas that are used this year in bedding areas right here and stand locations that are late because they're hitting standing corn late in the season. Early season, they're on beans over here. You never want to let the ag rotation and your neighbors determine how you move those deer on your land and how you hold those deer. Instead, keep those food sources so that you can facilitate that inside-outside movement every single afternoon, keep the diversity of the food lasting all season long, and then you can be the herd influencer in the entire area and make sure that you're not simply waiting on a border for those bucks and deer to return back home on your land most of the time after dark.